Hey, what's going on? Stephen Platinum here. Um, there's a channel. I think it's pretty cool. It's called 83 Weeks. It's kind of the Eric Bischoff thing. And sometimes honestly, the thing isn't the videos aren't very useful. But this one I feel is. This is Eric Bischoff addressing a number of critiques that Vince Russo made. Of course, they worked together in WCW. I think it's valuable, especially for wrestling people, to listen to because I'm going to interject, of course, and you're going to like, well, who are you, Steve? Well, I had friends who worked under these guys. I've read extensively about both of them. My God, I even read their books, even the terrible Russo ones. So I'm going to just chime in with my thoughts. And of course, if you've got thoughts of your own, please feel free to comment below and all of that stuff. But let's get this popping and see what's going on.
This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com.
All right.
Well, it's time for our main event, boys and girls. I'm so excited about this one. You've been expecting this from the moment we announced our very first Eric Fires Back, and we've got several clips. We won't get to all of them. We'll probably just do one or two. But ladies and gentlemen, our main event, Vince Russo on how Eric Bischoff treated other people.
Eric Bischoff, bro, every single day that I worked with the man was the most miserable day in my life.
Okay, right off the jump, Vince Russo, big on hyperbole, big on bullshit. And I don't have a dog in this fight, okay? But if Vince Russo is starting off with, every day working with Eric Bischoff was the most miserable day in my life. Come on, man.
I never enjoyed it. I hated it. I never liked Eric as a human being. And
I can see that right away because Eric Bischoff represented a guy who would check Russo and a guy who was there because at one point because Russo wasn't doing a very good job. They had gotten rid of Eric Bischoff, um, and then very quickly, in you know, within a couple of months, brought Eric Bischoff back. Now you can't tell me that they shelled out all that money to let Eric go and then offered him the moon to bring him back. And I know that happened for a fact because Russo did a good job. So yeah, I could see Russo in his mind thinking, it was the worst because Eric was there to try to check him um, because he was deemed a failure on his own.
a lot of that had to do with, bro, had nothing to do with wrestling, had nothing to do with his psychology or his ideas. I did not like the way Eric treated other people.
That's always I gotta say too, that's always an easy thing to say about somebody to get people on your side, right? They don't treat people very well. Um, I've known a number of people who had worked with Eric Bischoff and for Eric Bischoff, and while those interactions weren't always positive, and certainly we've heard about different people who did not like Eric Bischoff, I gotta say, a lot of people really do like him, and a lot of people really admired how he was able to really make a good go of it. That 83 weeks, that's something that you just can't underestimate. You really can't. And right now, Russo is just laying on thick. Um, Really, like it's like an opening statement of a trial where he's just trying to get you to see Eric Bischoff through this lens right away. I mean, he's offering no facts or anything like that so far. It's just sort of like dragging Eric Bischoff's name through the mud before he talks about anything else, which is generally people who do that tactically. Um, in the way they discuss stuff. And obviously, he's pumping all this emotion behind it. Russo, I mean, with what he's saying. Generally, they're not to be trusted. Now, I'm not saying that Russo is wrong or entirely wrong or anything like that. I'm just saying he's using the tactics of a guy who's kind of full of shit.
people. I did not like the way he treated a lot of the people I worked with. I did not like the way he treated my friends. He was the most arrogant man I had ever met in my entire life.
Russo calling Eric Bischoff arrogant.
And him and I were oil and vinegar. And that's where Dixie Carter was clueless once again. There was a history that the two of us were forced together to work together at WCW. Okay. And what came out of that? Bash at the beat.
Um, Again, it's all Russo perspective, right? In his eyes, they were forced to work together. In other people's eyes, including probably Eric Bischoff, they brought Eric Bischoff in to try to regulate Russo because it was terrible. People can try to change history all they want. Did Russo have success in the WWF? Yes. Um, was it because he was regulated? I think that was part of it. And another was it was just a better fit. What he did in the WWF worked because there was already a strong infrastructure and foundation there. Now, they weren't getting ratings and things like that, but Vince McMahon recognized we needed a new direction for the company, and Russo was the right guy. And he kind of already knew all the people involved, and he could see how to move things. I'm not going to take that away from Russo, but that doesn't mean that he was brilliant, because when he was dropped into the pond of WCW, all these things that he was protected from, a lot of the political stuff, right? He didn't have the same kind of level of endorsement. He didn't have the same kind of the people was working with were not as familiar with him. In the WWF, he had been there for a while, and his ideas started catching hold because they were working, and also because Vince McMahon approved of them. When he went to WCW, he was expected to come in and be this genius, um, and he wasn't. And I think it's clear that he wasn't. I think Vince Russo writes a really good first chapter, as I once read. I believe it was in Death of WCW, so it's probably Brian Alvarez's words. And it's true, he has things in concept that are good, but without wrestlers themselves who would say no. See, here's the thing. When Russo goes, I'm going to push all of these guys that have never gotten pushed before, that sounds good on the surface, but it's also very self-serving, because those are the guys who are most likely to go absolutely along with everything that he wants to do in the hopes of becoming bigger stars and making more money, etc. Right? But the guys who are already there were inclined to work against him, especially once you were seeing the results of the early stuff that he booked that was so terrible. Nobody can tell me that Buff Backwell in a backstage vignette going, oh, 1, 2, 3, I'm supposed to get pinned, that's it, discussing the results of a match and then going out and then going against the thing that he was scripted to do. Nobody can tell me that any of that is, one, good, two, drew a dime, and three, set a stage for a good working environment and a good relationship with their fan base. It did not. Russo was shit.
Now, Dixie Carter knows, okay, there's a history of Russo and Bischoff working together. It didn't work. It was bad news. What the?
I mean, you could argue you could take that same line of logic and say they should have never hired Russo in the first place. But that was probably as a result of Jeff Jarrett, of course, having an affection for Russo because Russo pushed Jarrett to the moon. He's one of those guys that he lifted up from the lower mid card in WCW. And Jeff Jarrett was not known to have the best judgment either. And I mean, he always escapes. When people talk about Russo and Bischoff and all the rest of this, people kind of give Jeff Jarrett a pass, but they shouldn't, because Jeff Jarrett was as responsible for some of the worst stuff that happened in TNA as anybody, aka getting Russo, aka that Global Force shit that basically made them not just a laughingstock, but irrelevant.
Does she do? She hires Bischoff without telling me, thinking in her wildest imaginations that all of a sudden in round 2, Russo and Bischoff are going to be able to work together when that was impossible from the start. So to answer your question, I much rather would have worked with Bruce Pritchard, because at least Bruce Pritchard treated people with respect and didn't think he was better than everybody else, and his crap didn't stink. So
I've heard things that may counter that, but regardless, I'm sure that Russo would have been happy to work with Bruce Pritchard again. It was the high point of his booking slash writing career, was the WWF. Um, because there was somebody to pick up the slack on things, and there were levels of bureaucracy that people would have to go through and navigate and negotiate. And here, it in TNA and WCW, it was all on Russo, or he had certainly a lot more responsibility than he had had previously. And things that didn't work well in his skill set. I think Russo, I mean, you can just hear it here when he's ranting and talking. Could you imagine having to deal with that on any kind of corporate level? You're not going to. You're not going to want to. It's something that's good on a quiet writers thing, and then him pitching ideas, right, and getting people excited. He's good at that. That's his strength. That's not really an in-charge guy, though. And now Russo is being put into a position where he has much more responsibility. And of course, he wouldn't like someone like Eric Bischoff, because Eric Bischoff, let's face it, his track record as somebody who was in charge is much better. And now Russo had to feel as if, Bischoff was going to come in here and be put in charge of me, which is what happened in WCW. Don't forget that. When they got rid of Eric, but then they brought him back, it was to be Russo's boss in some way, shape, or form. And I'm sure when Russo saw Bischoff darken the doors in, TNA, I'm sure he was very upset at the thought of, oh my God, I have a boss again. Because Russo's thing is always, I just needed more time. That's the common Russo refrain in WCW and TNA. They just needed to give me more time.
oh, I definitely would have preferred to work with Bruce.
So let's show everybody that Russo's wrong and let you be nice about Russo here for a minute, because you're not mean to people.
I generally am not.
No, I know that. I was being facetious.
Anybody that's ever really worked with me, I mean, you talk to people that have spent any real time working with me. Have I always been, the nicest guy in the world? Probably not. But to suggest that I, in a blanket way, treat people with disrespect is first of all, it's just flat out wrong. And anybody that knows me knows.
I believe Bischoff here. I don't think it's a thing where, again, he's a person in a very powerful position in WCW and even at TNA. He's a shot caller. And I'm sorry, if you're a shot caller, you're not going to be liked by everybody just by the nature of things. But do I think that Eric Bischoff was some kind of tyrant? Those stories have never come out. We've heard stories of Eric Bischoff snapping and, like a speech that he gave in the back where they're like, we're going to sue Ric Flair into bankruptcy. And it's one of those things that bit them right in the ass, right? But that's a guy who was like tired and frustrated. I think Eric Bischoff on the day-to-day is not this monster that Russo is making him out to be. Just my opinion based on people that know Eric Bischoff and have worked with Eric Bischoff and things that I've read, and the other ways that I would have had known about any of this.
Knows that that's not true. Listening to Russo, and that's probably the longest Vince Russo diatribe I've heard since I left TNA. And I'm going to be honest with you, I've got post-traumatic Russo disorder right now, because hearing that guy talk is just like fingernails on a chalkboard.
Absolutely.
It's painful. Now, let's call it like it is. I mean, or tell it like it is. Dixie wanted Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan wasn't going to go to TNA unless I was there to watch over Hulk's creative.
Wow, that's very interesting. I don't know if people knew that it was Hulk Hogan they wanted, who was going to basically come up with creative. And then Eric Bischoff was there to supervise Hogan, which makes sense. Do I think it makes sense to bring Hogan in to do creative? No. I think it's one of those where it's kind of like when you have a really great basketball player and you're like, let's just make him a coach right away. If you were to do that, you would make sure that that player had proper support from people that actually knew the nuts and bolts of coaching and scheduling and that kind of thing. So that's what was Bischoff's role, which I find really interesting. So, yeah.
Hulk knew that Vince Russo was a clown and an imposter.
Yeah.
And there was no way Hulk Hogan was going to go to TNA and put his career, or what was left of it at that point, especially at that point, because you don't want to end your career on a negative note. And nobody trusted, nobody that knew Vince Russo trusted him. The people that trusted Vince Russo were the people that he could manipulate.
And see, Bischoff, again, he's a much more seasoned gentleman. He's smarter. He has the advantage of not harboring this ill will about wrestling. I think that his run as a character in WWE, not this last one where he sort of unsuccessfully and unceremoniously was dumped from SmackDown, but I mean the one where he got to be the character and smiling Bischoff and all that stuff. I really think that was kind of oddly therapeutic for him. He seems to have reconciled his place in wrestling much more in a much more healthy fashion and direct fashion than Vince Russo. And I do believe Bischoff here when he says, in essence, that he was cool. And he was there to do a job, and he was very focused on that job, and it was Russo who was erratic.
People that bought into his shit, who thought that Vince Russo was going to give.
And he doesn't speak in absolutes, which I think helps a lot too. Like, Russo says, like, Eric Bischoff treated everyone horribly, which I don't believe. And then Bischoff just goes, like, people didn't trust Russo, and the ones that did, it's because they were getting something from him. That's a much more believable explanation. It also jibes a lot with the people that continue to sort of hold water for Russo to this day, guys like Disco Inferno, of course, because they benefited from being around Russo, right? And he continues to be a guest on their show and things like that. I'm not saying that immediately disqualifies them as any kind of credible, but it does show the sort of like inborn bias that they had. Yeah.
Give them the opportunity that nobody else would. Vince Russo played to the lowest common denominator. That's how he galvanized whatever political power that he had. He galvanized that power by kind of aggregating all of the misfits, no pun intended to the character gimmick, but the people who aspired to get to the top without necessarily having to get over and actually perform and prove themselves. They just wanted, a Vince Russo opportunity.
Oh, I find that really interesting, this idea of the Vince Russo opportunity. It's kind of what I was just talking about, right? Vince Russo liked taking guys who were on the outside looking in and telling them you can be inside, you just have to do this crazy thing. Look at the people that he booked prominently. This is opposed to the WWF, where during the Attitude Era and the rise into the Attitude Era, he worked with everybody. And everybody was on the same page because Vince McMahon was there. And so everybody was on the same page to make a thing work. And at TNA, certainly it was. And I mean, when you read like the Young Bucks book and things like that, they talk about how Vince Russo really charms you. And he goes, I'm going to do all this stuff with you. And I already have all these ideas. And then you get those ideas and you go like, oh man, this is shit. But then you have to do them, because you feel like that's your only way of getting over. And then you find yourself on the outside looking in, but damaged because of what Russo has given you, as opposed to benefiting, as guys did in the WWF.
And you can go back and look at all of the things that he did in TNA and look at the things that look at WCW. Look at WCW under Russo's tenure. You tell me, if Vince Russo deserved to be in that spot or deserved that opportunity. There's a reason. Look, it's clear. Again, just whether you believe me, whether you believe half of what I say, or whether you think I'm full of shit, it doesn't matter to me at this point in my life. I really do not give a fuck. But under
I
any of
believe
those
that.
circumstances, step back and ask yourself,
Okay.
why would Turner Broadcasting, who unceremoniously not only sent me home,
Yeah.
but stroked me a check for $1 million in the process
Yes, that's true. All
of
that's
sending
true.
me home eventually, why would they turn around and hire me back less than 3 or 4 months later?
I was right
Why
about
would
that.
they?
That's right.
Can
That
you imagine
happened.
those discussions? Here's this guy Eric Bischoff, who did what he did at WCW, for better or worse. They decided it was for worse on September 10th, 1999, and they sent me home. And then a couple of weeks later, a month later, whatever it was, they brought in Vince Russo because he came in with this, I did this, and I created The Rock, and I created Stone Cold Steve Austin. He's a great salesman. He's a great salesman. And he convinced desperate people that he was the guy that could bring WCW back to the heights that I created. Not Ole Anderson, not Bill Watts, not anybody else that came before me. Only me. But Vince Russo was the guy that was going to he had that magic key. He was that guy. He spent about 90 days there, and Brad Siegel went, oh, shit. I think I've made not just one big mistake by letting Eric out. Now I've made another one by bringing this knucklehead in.
Yes.
And that was the catalyst for
That
Brad
all
Siegel
plays out.
calling me 3 months or so after they let me go and made me another deal for another $1 million.
Wow. I heard it was much more than that. It was just not more than the fact that they gave Eric Bischoff all this money, that they made all these other concessions too. Because Eric Bischoff was like, I'm going to go back to this situation that's probably not going to be very favorable. So I'm going to make sure I get a bunch of other stuff that I want. I'm curious if he'll talk about that.
To come back. Do you think anybody would have approved that? All the people that were involved, when I say all the people, it was an executive committee thing. And I'm sure there were people in the finance.
Because keep in mind, they were AOL Time Warner were in negotiations. So they didn't want to have a bunch of stuff on the books, debt-wise. And so for them to make that deal to Eric Bischoff shows how desperate they really were and how they did not have faith in Russo in the least.
Department that had a lot to do with it. But whoever was involved in that, can you imagine them saying to this as well, we just wrote this guy a check for $1 million. Now we got to write him another check. And oh, by the way, he wants a 2-movie or 3-movie put commitment.
There it is.
They're going to have to pay me or play me on these 3 movies, whether they buy them or not. Do you think they would have done that if they would have had any confidence whatsoever in Vince Russo? You think they would have done that had they not looked under the hood and realized they bought nothing but a bucket of bolts? Because there was nothing there. And of course, Vince Russo didn't like working with me because I challenged him. You have to, if you can't challenge the people that you're in a creative process with,
that's right,
as well as get challenged, if you can't stand up to that, then you can't be in a creative process.
That's absolutely
Vince Russo
true.
liked to be in a little room by himself and live out his own little wrestling fantasies and expected everybody else to jump on board and go, wow, that's a great idea. Viagra on a pole match. Oh, wow, Vince, you're a fucking genius. I mean, the stupid shit that came out of Vince Russo's head is what buried Vince Russo. Not me, not Dixie Carter. I mean, all you got to do is look at Vince Russo's track record. Every time he got challenged, he took his ball and went home. He had a fucking nervous breakdown. He was an emotional basket case.
Nothing, as the kids say, no lies detected. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up in just a moment. I'm not going to listen to the rest of this. I don't need to. Because in the case of Vince Russo versus Eric Bischoff wins because everything he's saying is backed up by the events that took place. And at the end of the day, Vince Russo's success, and he did have success in the WWF, but that success was a very different thing than what he attempted to do in WCW and attempted to do in TNA, both of which were crashing failures. I think by any objective standard, and people might want to argue with me. If you do, comment below or contact me. But Russo has failed every step of the way, and Eric Bischoff's thing of like, dude, then they brought me back after 3 months of just having him, and that says it all, and it really does say it all. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this look. As I get in more and more into 83 weeks, I'll definitely have another reaction. There's one that he had. Apparently, it's to Gary Juster, who they call Gary Jester in the thing. That's terrible that they would get Gary Juster's name wrong. And because I like Gary Juster a lot and I know a lot about him, I'm definitely going to listen to and react to that one as well. Anyway, this is Stephen Platinum. A little bit of wrestling history and a little bit of perspective, because a lot of people who listen to me are younger wrestling people that were just kids when the Monday Night Wars were happening, and not much older than kids, maybe teenagers, when the TNA thing happened, and may have never even seen TNA. So I hope you find this as interesting as I do covering it. And my name is Stephen Platinum, and I'll talk to you later.